This is what a perfect color grade feels like. Soft, balanced, effortless. It's that dreamy, filmic look that makes your footage feel like a movie, and most people struggle to achieve it. But there is a way. I've been obsessed with making my footage look like this. Smooth contrast, blooming highlights, rich but natural colors. And I think that's because I'm so used to seeing so much contrasty, over-sharpened shit out there that I'm just over it. I want it to feel organic. I want it to feel real. You tweak your curves, add some contrast, maybe even add some halation. But something still feels off. The typical advice? Just lower your contrast or lift your shadows. But that usually makes your footage look washed out and amateur. Here's the truth. Soft and creamy doesn't mean flat and lifeless. The real trick lies in how you manipulate your shadows and your highlights in conjunction with contrast and saturation controls within Davinci Resolve. So while I was in the car driving to the studio this morning, I thought about two creators who really nailed this look. Some of their latest work has really inspired this color grade. Andreas Hem has put out some videos that are just pure magic. The color grading is just phenomenal. And then there's Kyle Nutt. Lots of the stuff that he's been posting is not what he's traditionally done in the past. The methods I'm about to show you are used in professional film color grading, yet barely anybody talks about it. In this tutorial, I'll show you the precise settings to achieve this look, how to avoid common mistakes, and how to make it work on any footage. So this look doesn't necessarily start in Davinci Resolve. It starts right here, during magic hour, the golden hour. Now, there's a reason why cinematographers and filmmakers specifically choose to film during this part of the day. Notice the warm light just wrapping around everything. No overblown highlights or super harsh shadows. Also, my skin tones are perfect. Golden hour creates a nice warm glow around everything that you're filming. And if you want that soft, creamy cinematic look, this is the time of day you need to be shooting. Golden hour works its magic in so many ways. No need for extra lights or fancy setups. Nature does the heavy lifting for you. And with that said, you really only get 20 to 30 minutes of prime golden hour for that 1 hour time span. So make sure you plan your shots accordingly.
Now, as you can see, when you film during midday, you have extremely bright highlights and really dark, contrasty shadows. Now, there are ways to control it.
Look at this clip right here. This is a shot from a Sony condo trip that I went on a couple years ago. The model here is clearly in direct sunlight, but if you look over in the left-hand corner of the screen, you see this giant sheet of diffusion. Under that is a model as well. Now look at the difference. The model under the diffusion looks significantly better. There's nothing wrong with shooting in direct sunlight, but having diffusion is clutch.
If you don't have any tools with you or anything, you can always film in the shade, and then that way you get at least somewhat of a nice even light on the subject.
If you compare this shot to a midday shot, you'll notice the midday shot has usually blown out highlights or really harsh shadows. Now look at this shot during golden hour. Everything just melts together smoothly. Now, obviously only having 20 to 30 minutes in the morning, in the afternoon is not the most ideal for shooting. Most of us are gonna need to also shoot during the middle of the day. Here are a few more tips for you to achieve this creamy cinematic look. When I go out and shoot during the day, I really pay attention to the weather. If it's a cloudy day and there's clouds coming and going, I pay attention to when the cloud is between me and the sun, because when the cloud goes in front of the sun, it essentially creates a giant softbox. So pay attention to that and then film when you get that opportunity. The second tip is when there's an overcast day, you basically have a giant softbox throughout the entire day. So take advantage of that because some of the best colors actually come from filming on days like that. Another thing you guys can do is film with the sunlight or the light source behind your subject. It just kind of adds a little bit more depth to your videos. And honestly, none of that is really gonna matter unless you expose properly. There's a few people who like to expose and make sure the highlights don't clip, and then there's people out there who like to expose just for skin tones. Now, if I'm filming someone and the sun is directly on them, I typically expose for skin tones. But if I'm filming a subject and the sun is behind them, I typically expose for the highlights. But obviously, feel free to experiment and try out your own techniques. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this color grade, I wanted to briefly talk about camera gear. Now, although I did say earlier in the video, you can do this on any footage, there are some things that will also help you achieve this look in the camera gear space. The first thing I want to talk about is lenses. Now, there are a lot of companies out there that have lenses that have specific looks. A lot of people use photography lenses, and those lenses are extremely sharp. Then there's other lenses like the Athena Prime tuned lenses that actually have a little bit more character, which kind of gives the entire video a specific look. When I used the Athena tuned cinema lenses for the first time, I loved how it wasn't super contrasty. I loved how the lens captured the highlights, and also the bokeh had this kind of like unique look that I've never seen any other lens have. On my little Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K setup, I have an SLR Magic Cin Prime on this. What's insane about this lens, which I didn't know when I bought it, was when you turn it down all the way to 1.5, it basically has a mist filter on it. And it also creates some really unique flaring. By the way, if you don't know what a mist filter is, it's essentially a creative look filter that you would put on the front of your camera. And there's a bunch of different ones out there. I personally have been using the Glimmer Glass 1 made by Tiffin, and it has a really nice, soft, hazy look on the highlights, and it doesn't affect the shadows. If you don't have that though, you can also achieve that in Davinci Resolve. There's so many options that we can go over. So with that said, if you do film with specific equipment that has that look, it's going to be baked in. But if you are using more clinical looking footage that came out of a camera that is just super tack sharp, high resolution, the lens is super sharp, we can also make that look with that kind of footage as well. And get ready because there's going to be a lot of insane information that you're about to learn. All right, let's get started. And real quick before we begin, these are my project settings. So my timeline color space is Davinci Wide Gamut, and my output color space is Rec. 709 2.4, and that's because my monitor is calibrated for 2.4. So here we are in the color page, and I have a few clips right here that we're gonna be doing this grade on. So I like this shot the most. We're gonna start with this. This is shot on an A7S III, an S-Log3, S-Cine Gamut 3. With that said, the first thing we want to do is take the color space of what the camera was filmed in. We want to transform that into my timeline color space and then output that to the output color space. With this first node here, come up here to the effects and find the color space transform and drag that on top of this first node. For the input color space, select whatever your camera was shot in. So in this case, mine was S-Cine Gamut 3 and S-Log3. Our output color space, we're transforming this into what my timeline color space is, and that's Davinci Wide Gamut. Create a new node by holding down Option on your keyboard and pushing S, or you can right click and add a serial. On this node, we're gonna add the color space transform again, and we're gonna take it from the timeline color space to my Rec. 709 2.4. Awesome. All right, so everything we're gonna do is in between these two nodes. So drag the second CST over here and click on this first one, and we're gonna hold down Option, push S on the keyboard, and we're gonna create a new node. We're gonna right click on that, and this is gonna be our noise reduction. So we're gonna select node label and just type in noise reduction. We're gonna add another node. We're gonna call this one balance/exposure. Add another one. We're gonna name this one contrast. Add another one and call this one sat for saturation. And then we're gonna add another one. And then also by holding Option on your keyboard and pushing P, we're gonna add some parallel nodes. Go ahead and add 3 or 4. It's gonna be completely up to you. You can put as many as you want there. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and click here and add another node, and then add another node. This is fun. We're just gonna be adding nodes a bunch at a time. I promise you guys, I'm just setting this up so we have an awesome power grade to use on all of our clips. Go ahead and add some more parallel nodes. And then we're gonna come down here. We're gonna add another node down here. We're gonna rename this one sharpening. We're gonna add another node. We're gonna call this one halation. We're gonna add another node, mist. And this last one will be grain. And then lastly, this is going to be our look. So with that said, this look is an option for you guys to be able to build your own however you want to do it. Or you can download the free Davinci wide gamut film emulation LUTs that I have created, linked down in the description. Once you install those, you can come up here to the Fenn Davinci wide gamut film LUTs, and here you have all of the built-in LUTs that you originally had in Davinci, but you can use them right here in Davinci wide gamut. The famous one that everybody uses is 2383 D55. But in this case, I'm going to do the Fujifilm D55. Boom, look at that. Looking beautiful out of the box already. So with that said, we're going to color grade with this look on. Now this look could be a LUT that I've given you guys for free, or if you wanted to have, a color warper or something here to push and pull colors around, you can pretty much design your own look right here and consider that a look. But for this tutorial, I'm going to use the LUTs that I've provided. So what is a look? A look is something that basically adds some contrast. It adds certain colors into the highlights and the shadows. It has different luminance values and saturation values. So there's a lot that these looks will do to your footage that you have to know that it will do, but they are designed to also have some freedom if you want to add, some contrast or saturation. I'm going to come down here to the right-hand side and look at my waveform, and I have the eyedropper tool on, and I'm going to drag over my skin tones just to kind of see where they're sitting in the scopes. Now they're a little low, so on the first balance node, I'm going to click on the HDR palette, and I'm going to come over here to the exposure and pull this up while I'm looking at the overall waveform. Now I'm trying to get my skin tones kind of around the 512, 640 mark, and that seems to be good for right now. It looks a little bright, but don't worry, we're gonna fix some of this stuff. So here for the contrast, there's a couple ways you can do contrast. The first way is, since you're in Davinci wide gamut, you want to set your pivot to 0.336. That is middle gray for contrast. Now, pay attention to the way the contrast works under the primary wheels. If I turn this up, look at the waveform, look at the colors. It adds a bit of saturation, but if you turn it down, it essentially makes the image black and white. So if you do turn up the contrast here, just keep in mind, it does add a little bit of saturation, but it behaves differently than if you were to do the contrast in the HDR palette. So I'm going to reset this and show you that. The HDR palette is right there. Click on that. And if you turn up the contrast, it just adds the brightness, luminance in the highlights and the shadows. Now, if you want to have a little bit less of a contrasty look, you can turn it down. And look what happens when I turn it all the way down. The color information is still there. So just something to think about when creating this filmic, creamy look. For right now, I'm going to be very surgical with everything I do. So I'm going to turn the contrast up to 1.036. All right, on to saturation. There's a few ways you can do this. There's actually a bunch. So therefore, I'm going to show you a few methods, and then I'm going to show you the way I've been doing it lately. So the first method here is, well, you could just come down here to the primaries and turn up the saturation. You're essentially pushing color information through this node tree to the look, which already has saturation adjustments and a look built in. So you're just enforcing what you're doing here. I'm going to reset that. You can come to the HDR wheels and come down here to the right-hand side under the global and turn up the saturation. This way, you do achieve different results. That's what I've done a lot of the times. I really enjoy this. I love the HDR palette. It's very awesome for selecting specific things that you want to do and surgically make your look. So now I'm going to reset this, and I'm going to right click on this. And this may be a method you guys have seen on the internet, but there is a little bit of a difference of what I do compared to what you guys have seen. So if you come down here to the color space and you select HSV, then you right click on the saturation node again, and you come under channels and you get rid of channel 1. You right click on it, come back down to channels, select channel 3, so only channel 2 is selected. Then you go to the primary wheels, and you've probably seen everybody say, all right, well, push up the gain. And that's a good way to get some good density, some good saturation, and it's great. It really is good. But did you guys know I'm going to reset the gain, but if you turn up the gamma, it's essentially pushing saturation in areas where it lacks saturation in the image. So let's go ahead and look at our vector scope, and we're really pushing saturation. Like, well, you can actually come back to the gain and reduce the saturation. My buddy Chad Miller showed me this, and it was pretty interesting to hear about it, and then actually doing it is awesome. So you do get a little bit different of a look. It's pretty unique. I think it's cool, and it's a great way to kind of like dial back and dial in your saturation. Also, I'm keeping in mind, for the Fuji LUT that we're using, our look here, it does lack a little bit of saturation and it does lack a little bit of contrast compared to the Kodak 2383. But I like that because I like being able to go in and adjust things a little bit more. And it seems like it's just a little bit more natural to the eye. Before we move on, these first 3 nodes are the most important to focus on. If you don't have these dialed in, do not move forward. All right, so now I'm gonna come back to our waveform. And we're gonna start working with this node section here. Now, this is a great place to add whatever you would like that will only be affected by the signal before. So on this first one here, I'm gonna name this one highlights. This one, I'll just do warper. This one could just be curves. And then this one could be the slicer, the color slicer. There's a bunch of things you can do in this. So essentially you can come up here to the highlights. And what I saw at the Blackmagic booth when I was at NAB is the gentleman Joey there was turning his pivot up all the way, which essentially puts the pivot adjustment of the way this contrast is gonna work at the very top of the signal here. And if you turn it down, you're basically controlling the highlights by bringing down the whole image from the very top. And it was really interesting to see him do that. And I've been playing around with that and I kind of like it. It's really fun. For the warper, you can come in here to the new chroma warp. You can select a color and saturate something a little bit more or change the hue of it and really make colors start to pop. But if you do that, just make sure you kind of swap back and forth to your vector scope once in a while to see if you're kind of pushing things too far. If you are, well, maybe you need to dial it back a little bit. For curves, you can come in here and make any adjustments as you'd like. I don't necessarily use these, but they're good to have. And then as far as the color slicer goes, obviously you can come in here to the color slicer and kind of do the same thing that you can do with the color warper. But say if you do want to adjust the skin maybe a little bit, or if you want to, play around with the greens, make them a little bit more yellow, create more of a look, that's totally up to you. Next, we have this node just for any types of trims or small adjustments that you may want to make in the shot. You could raise up your shadows, you could control the highlights again, whatever you want to do. For this next section of parallel nodes, we're going to rename this one vignette. This will be left grad for gradient. This will be right grad for right gradient. And then this one will be up gradient. So essentially what I like to do is I will build out now me shaping exposure with windows. So you can come down here to this section, and since I'm on the vignette, I'm going to select this. I'm going to open this up so it basically fits the frame. And then I'm going to pull out one of these little adjustments here and soften up the gradient. And then I'm going to come over here to the HDR palette and I'm going to turn the exposure down. Now I'm going to turn the exposure down to about a half a stop, 0.5. But the problem is it's affecting the inside. It's not doing the vignette, which should be on the outside. So in order to fix that, click on this, and now you have a vignette ready to go if you need it. Now for the left gradient here, we're going to come down here, select this gradient option here. I'm going to rotate this up, and I'm going to pull it over to the left-hand side, and pull it over to about a third of the frame. I'm going to do the same thing here, come down here to the exposure, and pull this down about half a stop. I'm going to disable that. On the right gradient, I'm going to do the same thing, but it's going to be on the right side. So go ahead and pull that over, pull this over to about 1/3 of the frame, pull this down about 0.5. Good to go. Disable that. And then lastly, this is going to be the gradient going from bottom to top. And boom, bada bang, go about up halfway. And then also again, pull this down about half stop or -0.5. So now we can kind of shape light here. Really fun. So as far as the vignette goes, I don't know if I want to do a vignette, but I might want to add some gradients here on the left and coming up from the bottom. So I'm definitely going to turn this one on. And then as far as the left gradient, I'm going to turn this one on, maybe even bring it out a little bit. All right, let's move on through the node tree. So for sharpness, you can come down here to the icon, the blur and sharpen tool. Go ahead and click on the little sharpen icon. And we're going to pull down on the radius to about 0.47. I'm going to pixel peep now. So look at my shirt. I'm going to look at some edges here. This is actually a great example, this material here on the roof. So I'm going to turn up the level to about 14. And as you can see, it kind of creates like some weird edges here. So if you actually turn up the coring softness, you can kind of blend the sharpness of the edges. You typically don't want to pull the coring softness higher than the level because then it eliminates what it's trying to do. Maybe even, you could turn the level up to 30 and then turn the coring softness up to about 15. And that way you kind of get a good middle ground for the sharpness. Cool. All right. Next, we have some halation. This is an effect that you can find on the right-hand side. You come up here and type in halation. To be honest with you, I'm not sure if this is in the free version or not, but if it isn't, you should still follow along because eventually you will get DaVinci Resolve Studio. So with the halation effect dragged on that node, what I like to do is for the processing color space, we're going to be using the timeline, DaVinci Wide Gamut. So for the threshold, normalization, and saturation levels here, I don't touch those until I can actually see the isolated region of what I'm trying to do. I only want the halation to really affect the edges of certain things. Sometimes you'll have the whole image selected like that, depending on your shot. Sometimes it'll be higher. So I like to come in here and just kind of find a good middle ground and just find, okay, where do I want this halation? If you don't know what halation is, I'll show you real quick. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to zoom in. And if you looked at the isolated regions, you can see that there's certain edges that will have this effect on them. So I'm going to disable it. And now I'm going to re-enable it. Look right here. It kind of creates like that filmic look that, Sam Colder has used in the past. You've seen it in some of his videos. It's very popular in film. It's a natural defect that, old films had. You don't want it to be too crazy though. You don't want it to go over the top. If you're pushing it and it just looks like super red, sure. If that's something you want to do in your video, power to you. But it looks ridiculous if you go too far with it. I'm going to turn the strength down a little bit, and you can also play with the spread, which is actually really fun. So you can click on the view isolated regions just to kind of double check, come in here, and I want to turn the spread down. I just want to create a little hint of it. I don't want it to do too much. If you do too much, then it just ruins the shot, in my opinion. So now let's go ahead and select the mist. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. I've created a video, an older one that shows you 3 different ways to achieve this look. You can also use the mist filter, which I talked about earlier in this video, or you can add the glow node. And I'm going to show you one other way to do it after the glow node. But if you drag the glow node on, you can come up here to the right-hand side, show the shiny regions, and basically turn this down until you get some bright areas that you might want to have the glow coming from. Go ahead and click on the drop down and show glowing image. Obviously, that's overkill. We are not getting invaded by aliens. So if you want to turn up the shine threshold, you can, or you can turn it down and then just basically turn the gain down. And while looking at the waveform, you can turn the gain up or down, but just remember you are working within this look. And so there will be some roll off in the way this is designed. And so you can do something like that, or let's go ahead and reset this. This is kind of like a fun little way to do it. You can right click and then come down to composite mode and come down to screen. Then click on the curves and we're going to click on these 3 little dots and add editable splines. Click on this top one and let's go ahead and drag this just a little higher like this. And then on this bottom one, we're going to drag this all the way to the corner like so. And we can tighten this up a little bit more just so it kind of just does the bright areas. And then come down here to the blur and sharpen tool. And I don't know if many of you guys know this, but there's a little mist icon right here. So you can click on this and you can turn the radius up and that will basically create a mist filter. And it's really only affecting the upper luminance. You can look at your waveform and kind of play with it and stuff and, yada, yada, yada. But that's another way to generate this mist look. All right. For grain, let's go ahead and come up here to the effects, add the film grain, and up here, pick whatever you want. I'd like to do the 35 millimeter, looks good. But if you want my custom settings, these are them. So pause the video, and this is what I like to use all the time. It's a great grain that doesn't look like some of the stuff that's in the presets. All right, so now let's push the image. Let's go ahead and just start to really give it some oomph. So say you're like, all right, this looks good and all, but I kind of want it to look a little bit more punchy. What I like to do is honestly play with the saturation and the contrast. Now I did have my camera set to 5500 Kelvin. It was kind of a partly cloudy day. So there's a few things we can do. We can click on the balance and we can push it to just be slightly warmer. I'm in the HDR palette. You can go to the global here and push and pull with it. You can also adjust the white balance and the offset with the primaries. And what I like to do is look at the, the vector scope and just kind of see, okay, is the center of the signal somewhat, in the middle? Now, since we have this look on here, it's going to push and pull the color information in certain directions. So let's go ahead, click on the saturation. I'm just going to turn up the saturation a bit and just kind of get things to where I think would be a safe bet. I'm actually going to turn down the vibrance by pulling down the gamma a little bit. Honestly, you could just go from here and things are good to go. Now, I know you guys have seen a lot so far, but I have yet to get to my favorite part of what I've learned over the years that I don't really see anyone else doing. So let's talk about it. These next few options are going to be kind of up to you and how you want to use them. So for example, let's go ahead and add a new node after halation. I'm going to come down here to the qualifier, and I'm only going to turn the high down to around 45 to 50. Now I'm going to click on this little highlight icon. Now I only want to be selecting the darkest parts of the image. That's it. Anything that's super black, that should be black. And then once I've done that, I'm going to come down here to the saturation and just pull it down. There's a couple ways to desaturate highlights and shadows, but that just seems to be the easiest way. A few other ways you can do it is you can go to the HDR palette, click on this bottom color wheel, and you can turn the saturation down all the way for these blacks here, or you can do it for the darks. But I just like doing it this way, and this is also what I saw somebody do at the Blackmagic booth at NAB. And it was awesome, and it's super easy, and it kicks ass. All right, next, let's do a quick little thing that I've also been doing over the years that I really like. So after we have I'm going to rename this to shadow. After the shadow desaturation, on this node here, let's go ahead and rename this soft. If you guys didn't know this, if you come down here to the curves adjustment, and say you did push your image pretty far, right? Let's say you pushed up your contrast quite a bit. You wanted to push your saturation quite a bit. And I'm just doing this for the example for YouTube, but say you did push it pretty far, right? You have this channel. If you look at the parade, look at this channel down here. You're pushing the signal pretty freaking hard. I might back off actually a little bit on the contrast. But since I pushed the saturation, that's what's happening to the signal. So with that said, if you click on our soft node and you go down under the custom curves, you can pull up your low soft to 100% and you can pull down your high soft to 100%. Now, what's really cool about this is you're somewhat saving yourself if you push it too far, and you're also adding a look. So I'll be honest with you, if I looked at the vector scope, I'm pushing the signal way too hot. It's going way too far for saturation. So I'll pull it down quite a bit, pull this down quite a bit, and come back to the parade. And you guys can see the soft adjustment is kind of saving and recovering the highlights and the shadows. Now you can choose to do this in Davinci wide gamut. If you do, it's a little less subtle, and you can adjust it by bringing up the shadows like this. And if you look at the actual image, let's go ahead and do some pixel peeping. You can see how it kind of like adds like a fade, I guess you would say, but it rolls off the shadows nicely. And it also does the same thing for the highlights, which is awesome. So if I turn this down, off, on, you can kind of see here, if I pixel peep, it's bringing up the shadows, but it's also still retaining the detail. So I'm going to go ahead and back this off. This is a pretty good, well-exposed overall clip. So I'm going to show you that actually in action on some other clips that have a better example. Oh yeah, and one more thing. If you want to just kind of have like a safety net where you know it's going to be okay if you start to push and pull things a little too far, you can come to the very last CST, click under the effects, and on the very bottom, you'll see gamut mapping method. You can turn on saturation compression. This is kind of like a bumper in case you go too far with things. You can use it. You don't have to use it, but sometimes it's just nice to know you'll always be okay with whatever you kind of do as far as saturation goes. So now that we've created this node tree, we are going to be able to reuse it and only have to make a few adjustments for every single shot. For example, this clip here, this clip here, this clip here. This is all from the same location, same time of the day, same camera. So I'm just going to highlight by clicking on this first clip here, holding down shift, clicking on that last one, and middle mouse clicking on the one that we've graded. We've done all of our homework as far as look development, grain, the gradients, a lot of stuff, the saturation levels. So essentially, all you really should focus on is your white balance and your exposure. You also have to keep in mind if you used, some gradients and you don't want to use them, don't use them. Maybe for this shot, I'll use the vignette. So as far as the balance goes, I'm going to look at our skin tones. I'm bringing, the eyedropper over the skin tones, and it's running, it's kind of going high in the waveform. So I'm just going to pull down on the exposure. And then also I'm noticing that the skin and the whole scene is quite warm. Here's a little trick for you. We can disable this look. And I know I've said, okay, we're going to make all of our adjustments under the look. That is true. But say you want to try to make sure that this up here is white, or you have something in your shot that's white. Come over here to your vector scope, click on the little adjustments, and select high. Now, if you drag your mouse over the cloud here, you can kind of see, yeah, that little dot is almost right in the middle. And that is what you want. You want the little dot in the middle of the vector scope to be in the center of the vector scope. But that is only if you're viewing the high upper range of that vector scope view. If I expand it out, you can see it's a little over to the left. It's a little warm. And so by coming over here to our balance, under our HDR wheels, you can kind of pull this little dot so it's right in the middle, like that. So now we went from that to that, and we can throw our look back on, and there we go. Contrast looks good. You jump over to our parade, everything looks good. Our waveform looks pretty good. And keep in mind as well, we do have the soft on, and that does bring up the shadows a little bit. And also something to focus on is the desaturation of the shadows. So whenever you do a new clip, just quickly come over here, click on the highlight icon, and just make sure you drag the high down to the point of where you're just having the blacks desaturated. If you're starting to go into shadows and stuff, you don't want to go too crazy with it, but you should just make a slight adjustment just to make sure. And then that way, you're not desaturating things that should have color. All right, hopping over to our next clip. Again, I'm just going to reset the node balance and white balance. Just look at this overall. We got this gradient here. We have this left gradient, which I don't think I'm going to want. The right side also looks kind of dark naturally. So I'm just going to leave that as is. Now, as far as the skin tones go, I'm highlighting over where I am. Honestly, looks pretty good. It could probably come up just a little bit. So I'm just going to bump this up a tiny bit. And yeah, it seems like we're good to go. But now let's say you're not just working with the Sony. Say you're working on some Blackmagic footage. Well, now I have a group of clips here that's all shot in Blackmagic RAW. So if you highlight this clip and middle mouse click, well, it's not going to look right because it's not taking the correct camera space and putting it into your timeline color space. So all you have to do is click on this first CST, come up here to the right-hand side under the effects. You can take this from Blackmagic Film and Blackmagic Film Gen 5, and then work with the footage from here. Something I wanted to touch on that Andreas Hem did in his videos is obviously all of his shots were beautiful. But if you noticed, there's something he did with a vignette that I don't know if you guys saw, but essentially he kind of blurred the edges. For this example here, I'm going to turn on the vignette. You can come up here to the effects, type in blur. You can add any of these blurs here. So we could just add a lens blur and we get something that's very similar, but you can turn up the blur size. But just keep in mind, it will be exactly where the vignette is as far as the fade and how much of the look that you're trying to really make this happen. So if you crop it in, it's going to look a little overly done. So just keep it where your vignette will be and you'll be good to go, and don't use too much of it or else it just kind of takes away. But it is a very subtle thing that he did. And then as far as Kyle Nutt goes, looked really soft. And so a good way to do that is to really crank up the low soft and the high soft adjustments. And then also if you want, you can, disable that, but then come to the contrast, and under the HDR palette, you can actually turn the contrast down. So it kind of gives you a more natural-ish kind of look, a little bit more filmy, a little bit more ruined, I guess you could say. That is something you will have to somewhat determine if you want to do it like that. There isn't one way to do this, you guys. There's not one way to do something. There's a million ways to approach it, and I hope this wasn't too much, but I hope it just gave you enough insights on how much you can achieve and how many varieties of things you can do, mixing and matching tools. Thanks again for watching, you guys, and I will see you in my next video.